I'm going to pass it off to Taisha, who's going to do a quick sensitivity training so that we can make sure that as judges, we are being sensitive to how we're judging and scoring teams, but also how we're asking questions during the judges and question and answering period. Taisha, would you like me to open the slides or would you like to share your screen?
You can open. Thank you so much. Okay, great. So again, as Ariel said, this will be a little bit of sensitivity awareness. We have to think about the times that we're in now. Things have shifted from when we were in middle school within society. So just being aware of some how to respond to students and what to say to them at the same time would be helpful, especially during the Ethics Bowl. Next slide. So the purpose is to provide Ethics Bowl judges with information that will guide and increase the understanding of the role as it relates to sensitivity awareness. Back one slide. Sorry. Yeah, right there. So just being mindful of the actual participants. So our participants are New Jersey students in grades 6 through 8. That is extremely important because we must remember that they're still kids. In addition, they're students from diverse backgrounds, which include race, ethnicity, gender, identity, religion, and socioeconomic status. These are so many different things that we have to keep in mind when having these conversations and or responses.
I just want to quickly say that we've had a few straggling teams from across the country. So we're actually going to have a school from Texas and a school from Massachusetts. The majority of the schools are from New Jersey.
Thank you. Welcoming students in. We have to ensure that the environment is welcoming for all students. And how do we ensure that? By being encouraging, supportive, and creating an environment conducive to respecting all students' backgrounds, experiences, and cultures. Intent versus impact is another big piece. We cannot dictate how a student reacts to a response. Although our intentions may be one, the impact that it has on a student may feel a little different. So definitely being mindful of that. What are you judging? Content only. We are judging should be based on content only. These are just a few things just to, keep in mind. Leave all opinions out of the judging space. Focus on what the student is bringing forth. Be mindful that you're judging youth. Again, be very mindful that they're youth. Don't judge based on the student's home environment, because now we're in Zoom world and we can see everybody's background, see what's going on in their households. So let's just be mindful of not to judge based on their environment and meet the students where they are academically as well as emotionally.
I would just like to add on a little bit about this in terms of Zoom. So all participants have asked to have their videos on and to keep themselves muted when they're not speaking. However, we might face technological issues or bandwidth issues that might make it so a judge or even a student might need to turn off their camera temporarily. And judges are not supposed to be scoring differently because of this. Students don't necessarily have control of their connectivity, and we need to keep that in mind as we're scoring.
Thank you.
Ariel, I do have a question on judging on content only. Are we also judging on the way they present and the civility with which they respect each other?
Yeah, so there are parts of the scoring tool that talk about civility and engaging in a respectful manner. And in that way, yes, you are judging, but I think that we have to be careful about what lenses we use to make those judgments, right? And be sensitive that that may look different for different types of schools and for different types of students.
Thanks.
Taisha, do you want to add anything?
No, that was a great question, Margaret. It really was. Thank you. Some things to avoid. Let's avoid jumping to uninformed conclusions or making assumptions when you see a student dress in a way that differs from your experience or what it means to be business casual. Let's think back to, I don't even know what year. Years ago, when we used to go to job interviews, I always ensured to dress the way I was taught, as wearing a suit and things of that nature. Things have changed. And whereas people aren't even wearing suits anymore to job interviews. So I think about that on the adult spectrum. So I don't know what that looks like for students. So they may or may not have the attire that we expect for them to have on. In addition, making statements that are in a manner that is unknown to you. In addition, avoid making comments that are not related to the content or related to things that the student is unable to change due to circumstances beyond their control, just as Ariel just stated. Avoid targeting or challenging an individual student. Please be mindful to respond to ideas and not the student. Build off of ideas that are presented by the entire team.
Yeah, and so we don't want any student to feel targeted by a judge when they're asking questions. So the ideas presented by a team are directed at teams and not individuals, even though it might be the case that one or more students kind of takes the lead during the judges' questions. There's no expectation that all team members talk in all rounds. Different schools divvy up their roles and responsibilities differently. Some say everybody on the team talks all the time. Some have a few students taking particular cases. So if that student's case isn't part of that round, you might not see them speak at all. So try to resist the urge to say like, oh, Stacy, you said something. Can you tell me what you think? Like Stacy is representing an idea that their team developed. And so the question should be generically addressed to the team. To build off this idea around how students are dressed, there is no dress code for the middle school ethics bowl. So that's up to the schools to decide.
Great. Food for thought. I found this quote and I felt like I needed to share this. Judges play an important role in the students' educational and competitive endeavors. In order to ensure that this is a more equitable environment, it is important for judges to ensure that they are providing culturally competent and inclusive feedback and decisions that meet students where they are in order to create safe spaces and a healthy competition. I just thought that was a quote that wrapped everything up that would be useful to share with everyone.
Yeah, I mean, it is a competition, but the goal of an ethics bowl is really about the work that happens before the bowl and the thinking that they get to put on show, right, for the adult community during the event, and so that they can have conversations with groups of students that they might not otherwise have conversations with. So this is an educational environment first and foremost. But that doesn't mean that we get, as judges, to be on a pedestal where we get to lecture or inform students. The idea is we're there to help push their thinking and to do so in a way that is supportive of where they're at. Like, I think that I'm really grateful for Taisha reinforcing this idea that some teams are going to be up here and other teams are going to be down here. You don't want to ask a team that's down here a super hard question, because that's not going to feel good. Like, remember how that felt for you when you were students. So gauge your questions based on where the team is at, please.
And lastly, here are some references and resources. You can visit the websites for the National Speech and Debate Association, in addition to the National Education Association Diversity Toolkit. Very, very good resources. And thank you. Enjoy judging on Saturday.
Thank you so much for your time, Taisha.
Thank you, Taisha.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, so as we pause to transition, did any of this bring up any questions or comments that you'd like to share before we bring in our next guest speaker for the day? Yeah.
One question I had was when we're asking, like I was reading the script for the high school ethics bowl, and when we're asking students to introduce themselves, do we also ask them to announce their chosen pronouns or no?
That's not part of the script this year. Some schools might have it as part of their like lexicon that they do, and we might see some schools and students do that, but it's not something that is built into the moderator script. But it's a great question for us to think about moving forward. Any other questions?
Do you want the judges to dress in any particular way?
Whatever you're most comfortable with. So if you'd like to use your last name or your first name, you may. You're going to be asked to put your name in Zoom, to rename yourself in Zoom. So whatever your preferred name is, whether that's like this, I'll do it for myself. Like if that's Miss Sykes Judge, or if I want to go by Ariel Judge, it's up to you.
I'm sorry, I probably didn't speak well. I meant, do you mind how we actually dress?
Oh, not a dress. Dress. No, it's, the same thing that the students are being asked to do, dress in a way that's comfortable for you. Some of us are going to be on Zoom all day, but is appropriate for, a large group of people, including youth, to see you in.
Okay,
So
thanks.
no bikinis or things like that. Any other questions?
I look great in a bikini.
I'm sure you do, Clifford, but there's a time and space. All right. We're gonna transition then to Stacy Clark, who's just joined us. Stacy, would you like to introduce yourself, and then I'll share the screen whenever you're ready.
Sure. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Stacy Clark. I'm the middle school and upper school learning specialist. I think I came in at a great time. We're talking about shopping, fashion, and bikini wearing. So we'll start it off in a fun way. Ariel, whenever you want to start off just with the presentation. And, I have to tell you, I know, I just want to see everyone's wonderful face here. Let me just change you all to gallery. I know you all know this already, but I think it's critical that, particularly with middle schoolers, I find them to be the most fascinating bunch. I'm actually blessed with an 11-year-old, my daughter Riley, and I have a 16-year-old Ryan. So I feel like I am in the molasses. I'm going to be in the molasses for the next 10 years, and it's all good. But truly, when I think of my 11-year-old, when I was doing some research about Erickson's psychosocial development, this really does help me to understand not only my daughter, but when I work with middle schoolers every day as part of what I do on executive management and anxiety and test taking skills, they truly are at a very unique place. And again, I know you all know this, but I just wanted to give a little bit of a refresher as to really middle schoolers, who are we and why do we act the way we do? Because for me, they really are an autonomous bunch. And they're their own breed. And I say that in the most utmost respect and regard. So I tried to find some interesting pictures to depict them in all of their, oh, thank you, Ariel. You did the presentation view. Beautiful. So let me go on with, I started with briefly, just a snapshot of Erickson's stages of psychosocial development. There are actually 8 that go as high as all the way up to age 65. But for the middle school role, they're actually in identity versus role confusion. And I thought this picture of the girl with, the student with the question mark, because I find so often they're trying to figure out who they are. And who they are today is going to be very different than who they are tomorrow and what they're feeling. And so during this stage, identity versus role confusion, students are experiencing mixed feelings about where they fit into society and may experiment with several different roles until they achieve a sense of identity and really who they are. So every day that I, work with my students, I have 37 actually at the middle school. I see this so vividly. Who they are today and how they present can be very different than who they are next week or even next month for that matter.
Yeah, I would like to chime in as a coach of a middle school ethics bowl team this year. We'll have a plan for a week and they'll be like, okay, I'm going to be the dialoguer. I'm going to be the presenter. I'm going to be the question asker. And then the next week they're like, I don't know if I want to do that. And they try on different roles. And so I'm excited to see how that's going to roll out in the competition, but they have the opportunity in the competition this year to like try out the different things that are being asked, whether it's like public speaking and presenting in a clear way, whether it's thinking on their feet with the questions to their peers, or whether it's responding to an adult figure who's asking them questions. But because of that, we need to be sensitive that especially when the open dialogue part, they're going to be playing with ideas, and maybe they're going to be some students on a team that all are not on the same page. And there's no expectation that that's part of what they need to be doing. The criteria for open dialogue is the exploration of issues. So we want to be sensitive that they also might be working through, where do they stand on this case, and how do I navigate when my teammate has a different idea about how we should answer this question or explore this idea in competition.
Thank you so much for that, Ariel. This is something that I feel I live with every day for the learners that I work with. I am feeling this, and why don't you get it? Many of the times they are feeling and experiencing self-doubt, embarrassment, confusion, depression, isolation, and awkwardness. Not all the time. I'm not, indicating that these children are walking around so heavy laden, but these are feelings that are very familiar to them. And when they do feel this way, when they struggle during this adolescent identity versus role confusion, there are ways that they deal with these feelings. Sometimes they're rebellious. Sometimes they're paralyzed by feelings of inferiority. And sometimes I don't believe that we have this here, but sometimes they turn to delinquency, delinquent behaviors, negative responses. And then if you go to the next slide, Ariel, it's probably a little more optimistic that the majority of students, and I have the opportunity to see and witness children going from the middle school to the upper school, the majority of students become well adjusted to the emotional challenges posed during this stage and really develop their own sense of ideals. But it's truly through the success of how they navigate this really molasses-like experience from an adolescent standpoint that allows them and the support that they get that will ultimately get them to this stage. And I see this more as like the upper school students now that I see, and some of which I've known since the early years during this adolescent stage.
And I just want to build off of this idea that Stacey's offering, to keep in mind that this is the experience of students when you're asking questions. They respect you. They think that you have all of this knowledge in your head and you're evaluating them. They're going to feel judged. It's a competition. So how can we be humble and gracious in how we ask a question so that we're not exacerbating any of the anxiety that they already might be feeling, or this feeling of like, oh, the judge thinks that my idea, this value that I've picked, or this framework that I think is important is horrible, right? So how can we push them to think beyond their current worldview without making them feel like they've completely failed in their thinking?
And I think, Ariel, to that point, they are already at a, and this actually is a perfect slide to transition, but they're already at an extremely vulnerable stage in terms of getting feedback from us. I mean, I know even with my youngest, I can say something and it's, you already told me that. Are you saying I'm stupid? And I'm like, no, Riley, that's not what I'm saying. I just feel like it's miscommunication. And so to that point, sometimes middle school social and emotional development students will withdraw from parental figures, place greater importance on friends and groups. Those of you that have middle schoolers at home, I'm certain can relate to this. They do encounter peer pressure every day, the need to conform and accept ideals of the group. So it'll be interesting to see how they navigate their different opinions in the groups for the ethics bowl, and seeing how those that probably have a stronger sense of identity are able to really express their opinions without fear of being closed down from the group or criticized. And as we all know, this age is highly influenced by social media platforms. And so, as a result of everything they're experiencing, they can encounter social discomfort, loneliness, anger, sadness, and anxiety. I would say the most familiar one that I see is anxiety with some of the students that I work with. And that goes for children, not just learning profiles, just in the grade overall, just during this stage, a lot of anxiety about performance, who they're becoming, how other people perceive them, and the risks that they want to take and how confident they are in taking them. And what greater risk than to be engaged in a dialogue where you're stating your opinion and you're arguing your case. So.
I just want to say that I have a 19-year-old daughter who's just gone through all of this, and that this is very, very real, and it's very, very sensitive.
Oh, isn't it so true? So,
Yeah.
So here's the thing, Clifford, you've made it to 19. Congratulations. As a parent of a 19-year-old, will I get there? I'll get there.
Still working. You'll definitely get there, but I'm still working on it and learning how to be very, very careful and very sensitive. It's a budding spirit all the way through, and they really don't think we understand, and they often want to push us into a place where we think we understand, and then come at them. Well, all in the name of helping them, but honestly, lighter center, lighter. That's all I'm saying. The lighter you can be.
It's so true. And you know what I've really been working on in general with this age group, but not only with my children at home, but the art of pausing and not responding.
Beautiful. Yes. Yes. It goes a long way.
It doesn't work all the time, but I so want to respond and be like, I love you. I'm trying to help you. This is what I do for my job, but they don't see that. So I'm just trying to pause and listen. And yeah, you and I could probably talk for hours about this stuff. But anyway,
I'm step back.
The early adolescent phenomenon. So the two things that they're experiencing, the spotlight effect, but it really is all about me, because everything that they're feeling, it's all about their own internal struggles. And I thought, if we are ever in the age of selfies, this is it. So this picture to me captured everything of this age. And this personal fable and myth, these children, these students really do believe that we've never felt this way before. We've never lived in their shoes. We don't know how we got to our 30s, 40s, and 50s and 60s. But clearly we have skipped over the adolescent age. And so this is truly what they hold on to. And they really do believe that we have never gone through a breakup or, sexual orientation or, disappointment or anxiety taking a test. There is that sense. Some students really do feel that we've never experienced this. And we all know that's not true.
Yeah, so I want us to pause here and just think about like how this might manifest in the competition. So I know I'm experiencing as a coach, working with the students to figure out how they can do exactly what Clifford just modeled for us, stepping back and stepping forward, right? And so having trust in their teammates and thinking like, I don't have to be the first person to answer all the time. I can pause, like what Stacy was saying, and let somebody else on my team pick up the idea and run with it. But you're going to see students navigating this, who's participating and how they're participating, both in the judges' questions when you're talking to a particular team, but I think most specifically during the open dialogue. There's no rules for like raising your hand, or team A has one person who speaks, then team B has one person who speaks. Part of what it is that they have to figure out, which is a tall order, if we also add like we're doing this on Zoom, which makes participation more complicated. They have to navigate how they're going to communicate with each other and how they're sharing space. And one of the criteria that you're judging on is how well you saw the teams navigate that, like stepping forward and stepping back and being respectful and opening it up to the people who want to speak in the space and time that there is provided for that speaking. To go off another idea before I lose it from my mind, the reason why we are also putting the judges in breakout rooms is so that you need to be scoring independently and not being influenced by one another. But let's say you have a question or idea that you are thinking about asking a team, but you want feedback. The judges' breakout room space would be an opportunity to kind of spitball some ideas with your fellow judges. I'm thinking about this issue. Do you think that's appropriate? Do you think the wording is right? So use that time as a community to play off what seems like the best use of your judges' question and answer time, but we kindly ask that you don't use that space to talk about your scoring. That should be something that you do independently and that you say is consistent throughout the entire event, and that you're not influenced by your peer judges.
This is something that, again, I know you all know this. These are not only reminders for you all during this experience, but I take them personally. They're my reminders whenever I have a discussion with my students. Now what discussion norms, implications, and thoughts? Listen first and avoid overreacting. Adults who respond with shock, anger, or disbelief, or power, assertive discipline, make it difficult for students to regulate their emotions. So if you respond to them in a overly or overt aggressive manner, or coming across somewhat judging, for the adolescent, they're going to take that and obviously feel defensive and might have a myriad of feelings surrounding that and feel uncomfortable. And we never want them to have that level of discomfort. We'd like to, that's okay, create a safe climate by discussing emotions, feelings, and issues openly without judgment. Even if you do not agree with the student's response, reply with acceptance of their opinion. And we all know this, right? We validate what it is that they're feeling and then ask open-ended questions such as the following. What led you to your decision? Why do you feel this way? Can you see the other side of the equation? If not, why? Why not? Most importantly, or more importantly, acknowledge their opinion. Regulate your own emotion. Don't over respond. Be sensitive to their age group. And remember, they're middle schoolers, which they are their own species in the best and most fabulous way. And I know, again, I never wanted this to come across as I was being punitive, or these are things that we all know, but I take these reminders to heart, and I remind myself of these things when I'm interacting with students. And even when they tell me things that I might inside, I might respond, and I have to pause and I have to remember how I'm coming across to that student, because the more accepting I am of them, the closer they will come to me, and the more open they will be about how they feel, and they'll feel safer. And it's all about building a safe climate. And they can only feel safe if we provide that level of acceptance. And that's all I have for today.
Great. Thank you so much, Stacy.
It's my pleasure. Everyone have a wonderful afternoon. I have to jump to my next. Ariel, you all provided such exciting topics. The second one about COVID, I think is most really interesting. And the best man one, I want to hear. It's going to be recorded, right? I'll be able to get access to this dialogue.
It's not going to be recorded because we want to respect students' privacy, exploring ideas that.
We have two sides in my family. And so my children, my 11 and 6, they took the opposite side. So anyway, okay, everybody, be well.
Thank you.
Happy Monday.
So building off this last idea about like overreacting or like reacting in a strong manner, because we're on Zoom and it's harder to read like cues, right? We're all learning the norms around that. I would just caution around like your facial expressions, right? Rolling your eyes, where you're looking when students are talking, even if you're not intending, it might land on a student in a particular way, and then they might get tongue-tied or defensive or react in some way unexpected, perhaps. Does anyone want to add anything before we move on to the next? Any questions, any other insights that you think might be helpful if you've been a judge in the past? Okay.
I'll just throw in again, sorry to be the only person, super encouraging, really, this is a great chance to give them some sense of confidence, and creating a platform of listening is just fantastic. Yeah.
Thanks, Cliff. So to build off of this, we're going to send this out as a PDF document with more specific examples, but sometimes, and this generally is the case when we have people who are new to judging ethics bowl in general, or new to the particular age group, they're not quite sure how to ask questions. So we came up with this quick tip list for like things that you might want to keep in mind for asking questions. And so the first thing is that you need to make sure that you know the cases that are being presented in the rounds that you're judging, or the matches that you're judging in advance. Specifically, if the case brings up terms or concepts or experiences that are new to you, you might want to do some research so that you can be informed, so that your questions and how you score the teams is also based on, the facts of the case. So when responding to the team's questions or presentations and open dialogues, you could ask them to extend the argument. You could say, well, I heard you say this thing, like, what if this was true? Or what if this little thing was different? Or would it apply in this other situation, this other hypothetical situation? You could ask them to explore different possibilities and alternate perspectives. So this is a big part of what the Ethics Bowl is about, is the explorations of different ideas and to consider other points of view, not necessarily just one versus two different perspectives, but like the myriad of possibilities. And so students or teams that aren't doing this, you could ask them like, well, what are some other options that somebody might do in this case? Or what might be another reason for why they might choose to do this? If you feel like leaving it that open-ended might be challenging for the team based on where they're at, you could say, well, what about this particular person's perspective? Or what about this particular alternate option, and see if they can build off of an idea that you lay out. And then that connects to stakeholder analysis. So they're expected to think about how their decisions on cases and how they answer questions impact the different people involved, both like the immediate people and the ripple effects that it will have. So if you're not hearing the conversations of how people are being impacted, or there are 5 people involved in that particular case and they only talked about 2 of the stakeholders, you could bring in, what about his mother? What about his child, right? We can ask, did you consider those people's lived experiences and how that your decision might impact them? If you have a foundation in ethics and you feel comfortable bringing that in, you can ask them ethical questions, but make sure that you're, again, phrasing it in a way that is appropriate for the middle schoolers and where they are at. So use the language and terms that they're bringing to the table to ask those follow-up questions. Did I see a hand at one point? Yeah, Elizabeth.
So I actually did, this was before I knew that there was a middle school competition. I actually hosted a middle school ethics debate a couple months ago for my own students and a bunch of other students from public schools. And one of the things that we were taught for the high school ethics bowl in particular was that if students happen to be familiar with Kantian ethics or utilitarianism, they can bring that in, but they don't get any extra brownie points or any extra points in general for being familiar with these things, nor are they docked points for not knowing, like for not saying we've based our system of ethics on utilitarianism. Is that the same in yours?
Yeah, so the rubric is around exploring the ethical dimensions of the case. And you can explore an ethical dimension around somebody's duty or responsibilities or the impact on the majority of people, like which are ethical ideas, without using deontology, Kant, or utilitarianism. And so just because they don't say those words doesn't mean that they should get scored differently. Like if they're still exploring the dimensions of how those things like impact and intent interact, duty and responsibility versus promise keeping, whatever, fine. But I think that it is fair that if a team does bring up an idea, an ethical theory or framework, and they're not explaining it well, or perhaps they don't explain it at all, that as a judge you could follow up and say, could you tell me a little bit more about like how you understand utilitarianism to apply in this case? I know that I've been working with our team here when they use terms that other schools may not understand, that they know that my expectation is that they explain it in their own words to demonstrate understanding. So I think that anything that's not clear or that you're not quite sure you understand, you can ask them about. But thank you for bringing that up, Elizabeth. Some teams have a very clear way of dissecting cases, and they'll have a very clear model that's consistent across all matches. And other schools don't have that. And it's not about whether it's structured in a particular way. It's about whether it's clear, and it hits all the criteria, right? Considering different perspectives, exploring the dimensions of the case, and most importantly, answering the case question. Okay, so that leads me to number 6. I see you, Derek. Just give me a second. So number 6 is about if a team presents on a case and you're not quite sure how it connects back to the case itself, maybe there are things in the case that could inform their position. You could be like, well, what about this part of the case? Or you could remind them of the case question and ask them to like respond to a particular part of the question. Perhaps they got off on a tangent and you want to bring them back. Derek, would you like to chime in?
Yes, and you kind of alluded to the use of terms like Kantianism, utilitarianism, and so forth. Technically, these terms are actually discouraged to use at all, and they should just be explaining their own views without use. I noticed that sometimes they might say utilitarian because that's a base word in itself, but Kantianism or Aristotelian ethics or something like that, they actually need to be able to be explaining that view. So really it's discouraged not to use them at all.
Yeah, I think that we've made it up to the schools to decide. I mean, but the expectation is if you use the terms, you need to understand what you're talking about.
Right. I mean, the point is that the other team understands what they're doing. They're not barraged with terms that they don't even understand what the the thing is. So everything should be able to be explained to where the other team can understand clearly
Yes, correct.
on normal terms. Yeah.
And then the last tip is, like, let's say in open dialogue, the other team shared an idea or asked a question that the presenting team didn't get around to answering or exploring. You could just pick up on and say, like, I really liked Team B's question about so-and-so. I'd love to hear more about what you think. So feel free to build off of the ideas of the students themselves as well. Any